I'm Bob Dickie, and welcome to another episode of Taking the Leap podcast. My guest today is Jim Stirewalt. Jim started his career as an entrepreneur at the urging of his father. After growing and selling his company and learning the art of sales, he jumped into enterprise sales, growing and leading international sales teams for iconic companies such as Kronons, SAP, and IBM. As vice president of SAP, leading the fashion and retail business, Jim helped grow the business by over 247% in his final 2 years. Jim was also the head of worldwide sales for IBM Watson Customer Engagement. During this time, he led the transformation of a 1,600-person global sales team in charge of over $1.6 billion in software sales. During this time, he also helped lead an AI initiative to disrupt markets, leading to a pipeline of new business over $100 million for IBM. And he was later part of a $2 billion divestiture of the IBM Watson Customer Engagement business. He was also the Chief Revenue Officer of CoreMedia Corporation, the President of Marketplacer, and Senior Vice President and Managing Partner of GreyOrange. Jim has vast experience in business ranging from startups to global enterprises. I was fascinated to learn from him during this conversation and see how he views business and what he has learned in his career. I know you'll enjoy this conversation, so let's jump right in. Jim, it's great to be with you today. I have wanted you to be on this podcast for quite some time, and we were sitting in a coffee shop just last week, and we were just kind of catching up, and you were telling me all these amazing stories of your career and things that you're thinking about doing, and all these interesting things going on in your life. And I'm like, I was so upset with myself that I didn't have my podcast equipment with me. I'm like, dude, we have got to get you on the podcast. And so you kindly said, hey, come on over to my house, and we'll get this thing set up. And so we've got a little bit of time this morning, and I can't wait to ask you a bunch of questions and for our listeners to be able to hear some of the journeys and the stories and the things that you've been doing in life. And I think it's going to be really rich and informative. But I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Bob, thank you so much. It is as much of a cliche as it sounds like. I'm really honored, period. Especially if you look at some of the other guests that you've had on. It's humbling to be even included among that. I'm fine with telling my story. Mm-hmm. It's a journey, certainly, right?
Like everybody's life, yeah.
Exactly. I haven't perfected anything, but every day we're getting a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, let's since you and I and everybody else is on the journey of life and crafting and making decisions, and you and I were just talking about living in interesting times, and I was listening to you share about all these the various pivots that you had. Since the title of the podcast is The Leap, you've made leaps in your career, right? You've taken risks. You've led this interesting life. You've led sales teams in multiple organizations. You've been an executive in some iconic American companies like SAP and IBM. And I'm just listening to you share all your knowledge in this journey. I'm like, oh my goodness, we've got to capture this. I want to ask you some questions and make sure that people listening at home have the ability to learn from you. So one of the things, you've listened to the podcast. One of the things that I love to do with guests is to hear their origin story. So much of our life journey really gets started in those formative years. And I love to go back and hear what was going on in the mind of young people as they were starting out in their career and what the decisions they made. And so let's go back and talk a little bit about young Jim.
Okay.
What's going on? What are the goals and aspirations that you have, and how do you stumble into this amazing career?
Stumble in is probably a good phrase of it. My journey was not a direct line. It had some zigs and zags, but starting out, I had the benefit of having the childhood that I had and the parents that I had. There was a lot of stability. Now, grew up in a household where my father was a recovering alcoholic. He sobered up when I was about 2 years old. Which truly transformed our family, right? Now, he was still a good man. Nobody knew that he was an alcoholic. He held down really good jobs. He was quite successful executive himself in the coal industry. But, alcoholism's a disease.
Right.
And he made that choice when I was 2 years old. He didn't want to see me grow up fatherless. And so that fundamentally changed the trajectory of our family, including our beliefs in a higher power, for example. My father always had an incredible work ethic. He showed me the way in terms of how to operate with integrity,
Mhm.
how to build relationships, how to build a network, how to solve problems, how to build and lead teams. So I had a really good role model. I didn't really realize until I was much later into my career, as I started to see a lot of some of the same challenges that he faced in his career.
Mhm.
But I had many growing up. I had many interests growing up.
Mhm.
I was, and my parents encouraged them, right? I had interests very early in computers. I had, I was born in 1968, right? I had first Apple II. I had Radio Shack, Tandy computers.
Did you have a Commodore 64?
I didn't, but I had friends that
Okay.
had them. I had lots of different computers. I was into sports. I was into fish. I had a 60-gallon aquarium. I had a ornamental fish pond. I was into just a wide variety of interests. And what was cool is my parents encouraged it.
Mm-hmm.
They encouraged it. And they really encouraged, my exploration of what fascinates me.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
A very eclectic background with all those types of interests.
That's probably a good way to put it. And I think it helped fuel my curiosity
Mm-hmm.
for things. And I think that's stuck with me through my life.
Now, you said that your dad taught you these various things about hard work and networking and relationship building and things. Did he teach you this by like literally sitting you down and say, "Hey, son, I want to talk to you about networking"? Or are these skills that you picked up watching him and how he lived his life?
I'd say the latter.
Okay.
He included me in his life. I traveled with my dad quite a bit. I watched him in action where I didn't really understand what I was seeing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was the classic boardroom to boiler room. He would take me on mine trips. We'd go down in deep mines.
Really?
We would go. I would travel with him. I had, I traveled internationally as a youth, right?
Wow.
So I really got to see him in action.
Okay.
And the other thing was, as I got to know the people in his life, both people that worked with him or for him, and his customers. As a matter of fact, he treated his customers, and this is back in the day, it was a little bit different, where your clients, your customers, they're also your friends, and so these were lifelong relationships that he had built. And so a lot of the my understanding of my father was translated through things that people would say to me, and just the way that the regard that they held him. And he was a real humble guy, right? And he had a lot of reason not to be humble, but he was, right? And he believed in some of those precepts that I'm still getting my arms around, which is humility. It's not about thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking about yourself less often, right? And so, I was able to really watch him in action.
That's the best teaching and learning experiences is not what's being said oftentimes, but what's being shown as an example, right? And so I know you're a father, and you've probably taken some of those examples over your lifetime as you've raised your kids, and you have a daughter who's about ready to get married here on this beautiful property, and so congratulations on that. So this is, I know, as I had a daughter married this summer, it's one of those monumental moments in life where you really, it like you hit the pause button, you start really thinking. I've been very meditative and contemplative on life and where I'm at right now and in this season of my life, and then looking into the future. And so that was a little bit of our conversation even last week as we were getting together and just chatting. And so as you're thinking back on your career, maybe you're having some of those similar experiences right now, right? You're taking a moment of pause. You're looking in the rearview mirror of all the various things that you've learned. You got your start into the business world, really learning from your dad. And so as you're sitting back and you're thinking about these things, what are you thinking about? What's the mood and the emotion?
It's interesting. You do catch me at a reflective point right now, as I'm having a lot of really interesting conversations, and this summer I'm considering what my next mission is, frankly, and it's great timing, right? My son Jack's home from college this summer. Sarah, of course, is getting ready to for her wedding, and so the time is really, it's been a sweet time of reflection and really getting fueled up for what that next mission is. Tie it back to the beginning about my father and the beginning of my career.
Yeah.
He he always encouraged me to be my own man and make my own way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I graduated from college, the economy was not in a great place. And I had the opportunity to do something that a lot of people don't get to do until they're much older, and that was to start a company. Of course, like, what did I know about starting a company? Well, one of the best things about starting a company when you're young is you don't know what you don't know, and you go do it. And so I had the opportunity to started as a graphic design firm. This was back at the very early days of PostScript and Mac computers, and moving from shooting negatives and doing things in dark rooms and printing things to where the digital age presented itself.
Doing it all on a computer, the little Photoshop, and you're dragging and dropping.
We're talking, this was like the dawn of that, right? And I happened to, because of my fascination with computers and design. Matter of fact, I was a graphic designer. I studied marketing and advertising in college. Matter of fact, I'm sure anybody who's listening to this that's worked with me rolls their eyes, because there's nothing like working on creative projects with somebody who thinks that they're an art director or a graphic designer, right? Because I'm very opinionated about those things. Anyway, so here I'm graduating college. My father encouraged me to go do it. Now, and I had some really good fortune. And we started this business in Wheeling, West Virginia. This is kind of a suburb of Pittsburgh. And it was just all about timing. You can't beat timing. And I showed up with a computer, and people started saying, "Oh, well, I need a sign. I need a logo. I need," and I quickly found out that I couldn't. First of all, I probably wasn't as good enough. I really wasn't a classically designed graphic designer.
Right.
And I started building a team, and we grew that little business. And we were again timing. We ended up picking up some early accounts with the parks around resorts, and then we got into economic development, and then we got working for the local banks and the hospitals, and we grew this thing into a full service agency.
Wow.
Over about a 7-year period. And I was approached by a Pennsylvania-based agency, and I sold a large percentage of the company to them, which kind of started that was that next iteration of my career, where I had the opportunity, frankly, to really learn how to do it right. And worked for that company for the next 6 years. But I guess the point I'll make is, again, the tying it back to my family of origin and the encouragement that my father and my mother gave me to be an entrepreneur. My dad was a corporate guy, right? He never was of course he was an entrepreneur. Even when you're working in a company, people that succeed have an entrepreneurial mindset. So he had one, but he never got to fully exercise it. So vicariously, I think he did.
Just living through you a little
bit.
He did,
yeah. And he helped me significantly. But and that really was for me the beginning of my fascination with building businesses, building teams, cohesive teams, serving customers, understanding where the value is for everybody, not just your clients, but also your employees. So I kind of look at my my journey. Sometimes people say it's your arc of this journey. Well, it is. I think that's not a bad way to describe it. It's got sometimes some interesting turns, twists and turns. But my career is really, if I think about it, broken into almost three parts. And the first one, is really focused on entrepreneurialism, and I think about like hustle and sell, right? And this was about
those are some of the things that you learned early in that right there, hustle and sell, and
it's just how I felt. Like I was hustling.
Okay,
I was moving. And I learned some of the disciplines needed for startups. I learned about the grit that is required. I learned how to build teams. I learned about selling. I didn't even know I was learning about selling. But I one of the advantages of when I sold a large share of the agency was I had a guy that was one of the partners. His name was Evan James, and he showed me, not by telling me the words, but showing it in action, about selling intangible services, value selling, meaning you're not selling a specific thing, you're selling the benefit and the value behind it, right? And also about the power of the network, and how important it is to develop that network, because that's everything you do is going to be based on your reputation. Everything you're going to do is going to be based on the relationships that you've got and the references that you have. And of course, I learned just some of the, the nuts and bolts, delivery and project management, right? And I also learned that in the end, it's really about execution. As unsexy as that is, it truly is. You can have obviously in this. I feel like, Bob, in this conversation, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about comes across as so cliche.
Yeah, no,
because a lot of it is kind of obvious. Some of it's not, but that's one of them, which is you can have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you can't execute, it doesn't matter. Matter of fact, goes along with the idea of don't let perfection get in the way of progress. You have to execute. That that chapter of my life kind of brought me into through starting my own agency, selling it. Then I was hired, and that's what brought me to Knoxville, Tennessee, was to run a regional ad agency here. And then I ended up at a local, a regional company that was the last Kronons, which is now UKG, dealership. And it's like a dealership. Yeah, back then Kronons had regions where people would own. Well, I was brought on to help bring the market value of that company up for an eventual sale to Kronons. And that's what entered into my next phase. It was the next 16 years. And I kind of think about it like orbiting the enterprise, right? And why do I say orbiting? Because if you ever get sucked down into the middle of it, you become ineffective. And I learned through that period of time at Kronons, UKG, SAP, and IBM was really, taking it to the next level as far as how to run a business at scale, right? And how to do a lot of the practices that are critical, right? Strategic planning, budgeting, forecasting, performance management, right? Learned both on the professional services and the software side of things. I learned how to get things done without getting pulled into the vortex, right? Managing up. I learned about more about using, marketing and events and business development. And then, of course,
so all big corporate America kind of stuff. You're now working. Yeah.
Big programmatic, you have a lot of people, when I was at IBM, I had an organization of almost 1,600 people, right? So how do you manage at scale like that?
Can I just pregnant pause here? Do you feel that graduating from college, starting your own company, and you talk about all the various things that you learned in that time frame, it's almost like a real world MBA. You probably learned things in that season of life that even if you had gone to the best MBA program in the country, you would not have been able to learn those skills in a classroom. And that really set you up for being able to move into higher corporate roles and executive roles. I mean, we were talking last week and we were kind of joking about how sales is the lifeblood of every American business or business anywhere. And yet you can go to the most iconic MBA programs around the globe and they don't have classes on sales. It's like this is critical because you've been a sales leader. You've been a sales executive, and you really tell me a little bit how you learned that early on in your career, and then how you were able to take what you learned in your entrepreneurial and then move it into your roles at corporate America. Because one of the things that I see so often is that there's a lot of people out there today who are starting their business career, and maybe people that I have watched do extremely well got their start selling. Back in the day, it would maybe have been encyclopedias door to door. And today, it might be like Cutco knives or doing these entry level sales, and they're learning incredible skill sets that they will be able to leverage wherever they go.
Cliche. I'm still learning, right? I mean, I've been reading some stuff recently that really has helped reform my perspective on things, right? So I'm still learning. Now, again, always thought along the way that I'd pause and I'd get my MBA. And timing of life and where I was in my career, it never worked out. Now, I did have the benefit of, these large enterprises I work for. They invested quite a bit in me in, call it master's level education, not just on the job watching people do it, but programmatic education and
executive education.
Executive education. Matter of fact, at UKG, for example, I was a young talent. I was tagged as is hypo and everything like that, but I was a little rough around the edges. I remember I was given the opportunity to present in front of a very large audience, and because I was doing some pretty neat stuff that was being called out, kind of innovative in a company like that, and I bombed it. It was a total bomb. I went blank. I
You're sweating.
Nearly fainted, right? The whole thing. And there was my boss. It was actually my boss's boss at that time. His name is Chris Todd. He's now president of UKG. He saw something in me, and they invested in me, and they gave me an executive coach, one for how to carry yourself on stage, and then another one was just more of a business coach. Right. Through that process, they ran a 360, of course, where they go around and they interview your peers and the people that are around you. And it was one of the most sobering events of my life, the whole thing, right? Wow. Both failing on stage and then getting this 360, which the feedback came, it's all about Jim. And I remember receiving that news and how I just felt terrible, right? Because that wasn't my heart. I'm a team player. I'm an encourager. But I was able to reflect on how I was communicating with people, and I was being too direct, too urgent, too mission, get it done, and I wasn't empathetic, and I didn't listen. So that was a real. That was in my mid-30s. That was a real tipping point in my career, and so I have to point back to that company in specific, and both at SAP and IBM, I was invested into. So I think I got my education. Through experiences and through some investments that were put into my learning.
I want to double click on this because I think that this is so important. I've had multiple conversations recently where I've had friends who later stage in their career are going out and getting executive coaches. I mean, if you listen to the Jess Ma podcast, Jess is one of the most voracious learners that I know, and she's constantly, she says, looking for ways to scale up and have executive coaches in all stages of her career. And here you are, you've got a boss early in your career who spots something, and there's this moment in time where you're having this like almost train wreck, and that is so. Like to have a train wreck is bad enough, but you're living one out where it's on stage in front of all your peers, all these people at the company. Like that is like people's worst nightmare, right? And but you've got a boss who cares about you, has empathy. Is like, hey, I want to help Jim. And so, what would you say to maybe some young people or people who are listening who might have a friend or a peer, a mentor who's approaching them and saying, hey, here's an area in life where you might need an executive coach? Because I know some people will hear these and be like, I'm good. I don't need it. Or they don't want to admit that they need help. But you were humble enough to be able to take it, and it's had this huge impact in your career. What would have happened to young Jim had he not taken that executive coaching? Where would you be today?
Who knows? But I can tell you that it was certainly one of the most personally, at the time, it was devastating to get negative feedback, right? But then the coaching and what they poured into me, it was maybe one of the most important moments in my career. I guess what I'd say is kind of comes regardless of if you go and do formal training and coaching, but is to seek people's input and feedback actively, and to have that level of humility and self-awareness to be listening and absorbing and watching them, right? And to know that, look, we're all a work in progress as we go, and an opportunity to continue to learn. But I do think, having executive coaches, I think can be really valuable because there's a level of formality behind it. And I think that, as we mature and through our career, I think often we lose that a little bit because we kind of figure we got it figured out to a degree, and and as soon as we do that, I think we stop learning.
I think that the individuals that I have watched that have used executive coaching and have just scaled up because of it are people like you, like yourself, and others who have this humility and care more about the truth than about the image that they're portraying, right? And they want to seek a different perspective of how other people see them and view them. And the ones that I have watched in my career where people have tried to help folks get an executive coach or see a different point of view that refuse it, don't really want anything to shatter this image that they have built up of themselves. And they only want to have opinions that are going to validate this self-image that they've built up of themselves. And so it's so disheartening to see that, because you can see that they're literally being held back because they're not willing to accept other people's opinions and say, hey, got an issue here that you need to work on.
To me, it's really about posture, like the posture of your heart, of where you are. And look, we're complicated. You can have humility at the same time as being confident and being fearless and being curious and those things, right? I'm reading a book right now. You know who Andrew Murray is, right? The great South African, Scottish, theologian and author. It's called it's called Humility, the Journey Toward Holiness, which it sounds very religious of me to bring that up, but it's so powerful because in one of the core tenets of that book is that pride is the biggest hindrance to growth. I fight it all the time. I mean, Bob, when you're as great as I am, of course, people can't see me smiling and laughing, right? I tease my kids too, as they'll be telling me about all the great things that they are, and he's humble too, right? Yeah. And it's funny because as soon as you start talking about humility, how are you? It's hard to be humble, right? Because it's not a thing to be truly possessed. And so I think a lot of it comes back to this posture that we have, and it's a continual thing for me daily to put myself in that position. And when I do, really amazing things happen because I have had the benefit of being surrounded by mentors and some amazing leaders in my career that have taken the time, not just to I talked about at UKG where Chris Todd aligned me and put me with executive coaches. But I'm talking about these individuals that throughout my career have intentionally and purposefully coached me and mentored on specific things. So beyond watching them in action.
All right. So Jim, a little bit ago, I had just interrupted you while you were giving kind of like the story arc of this second stage of your career. And you're in this second stage of your career. You're working for big, iconic, global companies, and there's certain things that you're learning in this season of life. You had a great boss who saw you on stage struggling and said, hey, this guy's a high potential. We're going to get him an executive coach. They're paying into you or pouring into you, helping you on this journey. What else are you learning during this stage of your career? You've had some failures, right? And you're probably having some successes as well. But tell us a little more about this stage and what you're learning.
Well, of course, I'm learning on what you'd consider more like traditional domain expertise. You have to be an expert. I'm never expected to be a deep technical domain expert, but I have to understand the product. I have to understand how it fits into the market. I have to understand the value proposition if I'm really going to sell it and if I'm going to lead teams in selling it. But there were a few things that, matter of fact, I had the opportunity at IBM. I ran global sales for a division called Watson Customer Engagement. It's about a $1.6 billion line of business. And so we had a pretty large sales force. And I'm going to get to answering your question by telling you about some research that we did.
Yeah.
So I came into that position at IBM with some hypotheses that I believe were true based on what worked for me and what didn't work for me and what I saw work for other people as well. Okay. And I realized that there were about three different key elements to a successful deal. Right. And some people will argue there's a lot more, whatever, but I can kind of consolidate them down to three pieces. Obviously, and these are pretty tactical, and we were able to track these in our CRM system of, hate to say the word compliance too, right? Three really key pieces. One of them is very relationship based, right? And executive sponsorship, right? So securing sufficient or appropriate executive sponsorship in an opportunity, right? Decision makers is key. The other one is, I talk a lot about value and value realization, is that you have jointly developed a business value assessment with the customer. Sometimes customers have their own framework that they use, right?
Okay.
And this becomes even more important today. And we can talk about that in a little bit, because there are some tremendous changes that are occurring right now with some of the macroeconomic climates that we're in right now, even post-pandemic, right?
Okay.
But how important the value is, right? So there's that second piece. So having the ability in a process to work with customers to really define what the business value is, right?
Okay.
And that's another part of the conversation, which is great. Once you do that and once you close the deal, how do you drive that value and optimize through the process, right? A lot of this, though, all circles around relationship and creating a mutually agreeable path forward. I call it, and anybody that's worked with me, they're already rolling their eyes. They know what I'm about to say. Sequence of events.
Okay.
Mutually agreed sequence of events. And the value of introducing that into a business relationship early. I use it for my daughter, trying to figure out, like, aligning when we're going to do something down the road. What are the steps that have to happen to achieve that event? And for enterprise sale, it's not the sale. It is the delivery of the value, the software running, right? And so working mutually to agree the sequence of events, bringing that into the relationship, into the conversation very early, to define, what is their buying process? What is their procurement? Understanding it, mapping it. And frankly, it also is a great way to exercise empathy, to understand what they have to go through to acquire the technology. But plotting that out, and you're using it through the entire transaction, right? So these three things: executive sponsorship, business value assessment, and sequence of events. My hypothesis was, if you've got the combination of those three things in place, you're going to have a much higher chance of closing the opportunity. A couple of reasons why, but I'll say one of them, which is kind of obvious, is if you can't get a customer to either have an executive sponsor or agree to do a business value assessment or to have a conversations around sequence of events, you do not have a qualified opportunity. So you might as well disqualify that opportunity and work on opportunities that have some legs behind them, and that you have a prospect that is willing to have these types of concrete conversations, right? So that was my hypothesis. We rolled that out. When I was brought into IBM, I was brought in as part of a management team that was the mission of bringing together a large portfolio of products. It was supply chain, included order management, commerce, so e-commerce, and then marketing automation. And we had about 112 different offerings. So it was a very, very large portfolio of products. And again, we had about little over 1,500 people in the field, not just all direct sales. It was also pre-sales and all the support functions that take to execute.
And you're teaching them this entire process.
And we try to create it, yes. And we focus on simplicity, right? Salespeople, coin operated, and we can be like golden retrievers, and we'll go running off.
Double click on this. I want to hear it. Go. Keep telling me more.
Yeah. No, I mean, we just like.
When you say coin operated, what do you mean?
If it doesn't, if you can show me something points me to closing more deals faster, I am all ears. If you then tell me that there are 128 things you have to do, and you have to enter all this stuff into a system, and then you have to do this, and you have to show up to 3 pipeline review calls a week, you've now lost the game. You've lost them, and you frankly are going to lose the business because
you've made it too complicated.
You've made it too complicated, right? So we made it really simple. We also did a couple other interesting things that I think really help fuel this transformation and this growth. We doubled sales productivity in the second year. And I'll tell you about what a key part to that was. And we made it simple. We used AI in our own business. I'm sure we're going to talk some more about AI a little bit later, because it's where everything's going, right? But and which was to simplify things, having 112 products, how do you get a salesperson to understand what they're supposed to sell to what customer? Well, frankly, we built something called the box office, which is where a salesperson could go in. They'd enter some information like who they're selling to, what industry, who's the buyer, what are their main pain points. This Watts is AI enabled. It would then show the customer, the salesperson, here's the products
that you should be promoting.
Here are the bundles of those offerings. Here's all the enablement. Here's your collateral. Here's some emails to get you started. Here's some scripts. Everything you needed served up on a silver platter. The adoption of it was profound. So it was a combination of that enablement and then my hypothesis of those three key elements to a deal. So we ran it that first year. Next year, we had the big sales kickoff.
Okay.
Right. We bring everybody together globally. We had, I think we were in Vegas as usual in the software industry. I had my time on stage to really rally the troops.
Okay.
And I had the benefit of, frankly, one of the nice things of working in a large company like IBM, I had teams that were able to track this, right? We had the data in Salesforce to understand those three elements. Were they executed? Well, what we found out, and this is what I presented on stage, was when deals had those three elements, the close rate was 2.5 times or 250% higher close rate when those three elements existed. Now, I will submit that a lot of what drives that number up was the disqualification of opportunities in the pipeline that dog was not going to hunt, right? So it forced that because salespeople, again, coin operated, they have a hard time putting down the bone, right? They will keep, and that's a great trait. But I've seen so many salespeople, and I've been, because I am incredibly competitive and goal oriented, that I won't let go of something and move on.
Like, I've got a lead here. I know this guy's going to buy. I know they're going to close the deal. And so
it's like, why do you know that? Why do you know that? Feel it.
Yeah, I can just feel it. I've got so much invested.
Yeah.
I got that's the sunk cost is in there, and they're like, I want to get this done. So how are you helping your team understand when a lead was not a good lead, or when, even though they've invested a lot of time and energy in a particular company or customer, like, what, you got to move on. What were some of those things?
I mean, I've been a big fan of lead scoring. Everybody knows about BANT, right? Does the opportunity do they have a budget? Are you working with somebody who has the authority? Do they have documented need? And do they have a documented timing, right? So there's lots of things you can do to put a little bit of science behind it to move it away from a gut instinct.
Feel. Okay.
But those things can also be, because they can also be a bit subjective as well, to a degree. Good salespeople are really good at selling their management on why an opportunity is a good one. And that's why I think the 3-part program that we rolled out of the relationship, executive sponsorship, the business value assessment, and the sequence of events, those were demonstrable. I could go see it in Salesforce CRM. Right. So when we rolled that out, the adoption of those three elements skyrocketed.
Okay.
Right. Yes, we put some rigor into it. Yes, we train the managers about how to coach. So how do you do that? Right. How do you build a relationship matrix? Right. Which is key for the whole thing. And the adoption was pretty significant. And then at the end of that second year, we doubled sales productivity.
Wow.
And we had, and this was at a time where we were moving from on-premise software to SaaS, right? And that's another part of my arc, my journey of what I've seen in my career from a technology perspective, right? The world over the last 10 years has gone through an immense transformation in cloud computing, right? In moving from on-premise local software to multi-tenant SaaS software, right? So it was an interesting time through that period, and how important it was, and our customers were looking to us for that leadership
to help them get there. I want to ask you to take some of your learnings and apply it to a direct-to-consumer model that has been very prevalent during the pandemic, right? So you're talking about these concepts that you learned going all the way back to your entrepreneurial days. You learn these things, then you apply them when you're moving into these big iconic global companies, SAP, IBM, and you're leading big enterprise sales. But for maybe someone who's listening at home and in more of a DTC model, or they're a young startup entrepreneur, I want you to just real quickly apply some of these learnings to a case that a lot of people might be able to relate with. For example, during the pandemic, Peloton just exploded, right? And I was shocked to see just the absolute parabolic curve of growth that they had, right? And so you've got these $3,000 bikes, right? And the joke is it's a $3,000 bike, and then you've got I think it's maybe a $40 or $50 monthly subscription, right? And that's really where the money is made, the monthly subscription.
Yep.
But if I'm a sales guy and I do a great job of selling that bike, but then it goes home and it sits in somebody's living room or basement, and it just becomes a closet where they're hanging clothes on it and they're not actually using it, and they end up getting off the subscription. You're losing so much value on that sale that it could be going for 12 months, 48 months, however long. So if I were a sales rep trying to establish not only that sale, but also making sure that the customer was bought into the value, what are some of the things that you would coach up a sales rep, say in Peloton, so that to help them make sure that they're selling that appropriately?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, frankly, all the Pelotons are mostly sold over the internet, right? So there isn't really much of a relationship between Peloton and the end customer, except for an implied relationship through buying the product and using it, right? Bob, but I'm going to turn the question back a little bit, or reframe the question.
Yeah, dude, please.
I think that's a great one. Matter of fact, if I was ever explaining, I talk about the consumption gap.
Okay.
We talk about the adoption of and the use of the technology. It's a great one. I will credit you for this whenever I'm talking about how important it is in enterprise software to be driving that adoption and the utilization of the software, because if they don't, and they're quote unquote hanging their laundry over the front of it and not using it for its intended purpose, they're going to quit paying you for it.
Right.
It's a powerful thing. So with that, and maybe this could be applied back to Peloton, which is how do you create the motivation to use that? And a lot of it comes down to continual communications, reminding people of the value behind it. And how to use that product more effectively to really draw out the most value possible. And that's really been, you kind of, it's been fun zigzagging around in this conversation, talking about the arc of my career.
Yeah.
And that really is, I'd say, at the center of it. And I started learning it, in my entrepreneurial phase, but especially, starting at Kronons UKG and then expanding it further at SAP, because I was exposed to a culture that really was starting to truly develop these programs that were intended to drive this value realization, right? First thing you have to do is identify the value and get your customer to agree to that. But then you have to be very intentional in terms of what types of offerings and enablement and customer support do you provide through the customer lifecycle to drive that adoption and drive value out of it. And to me, it's important on a couple fronts. One is that continual revenue stream,
right?
Because we've moved into this world, this subscription world.
Yeah,
we're subscribed everything. I mean, frankly, cars now. You're acquiring cars now through subscription in many parts of the world. And so our relationship is becoming, from how it's monetized, it's changed dramatically over the years. So that requires us to continue to be driving that value. And it has to be in a very intentional program behind it. As soon as you find yourself in a reactive mode where you think you're going to lose a customer, you've lost the customer.
Okay.
So having that program built, and matter of fact, for the customer to understand that is part of your overall product, isn't just the code, the ones and zeros, and the brilliant code that sits behind it, and now all the AI, but is how do they adopt it And then how do you, frankly, continue to optimize the use of that? Matter of fact, that's what got me on the map at Kronons. I didn't know, I came into Kronons and I didn't really know a lot about enterprise software at the time, but I did know that I could go out and get to know people and understand how they're using the technology.
Wow.
And I developed a survey framework way back in the day. We're going back close to 20 years, Survey Monkey. And I'd go out and I own the Southeast region for Kronons. And I'd go in and call on these companies, large companies, and they'd be like, yeah, that's cool, man. Your clocks, they work, they're great. Problem was they saw us as a clock company instead of a labor management company that had some really powerful software that could help people do demand planning around their labor, to use it for healthcare, for acuity, scheduling of labor, and all these things. And when I went around it, I found out they were using just a small fraction of the capabilities of that technology. And that's when I read the book, The Consumption Gap, and I realized the problem that existed. And so I literally just went on a listening tour, and I visited all my customers, and then I did the surveys. And then I brought it back into at Kronons. I was like, look, here's how people are using this, using our solution. It seems like they're not getting all the value they could. And it was such an eye opener for Kronons. And we were then able to come back and say, here's how you can draw more value out. Well, guess what that did? Not only did it increase retention, it drove add-on sales because they were like, oh, if we added this module, we could do this. If we added this capability, it would add this much value, right? And so it really came down to taking the time to understand how your customers are using your product. Long answer, Bob.
Yeah, no,
this is great question,
and this is brilliant because it seems like your success as an entrepreneur in the early stages of your career, and then as you're moving into more complex sales, more complex leadership positions and responsibilities. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but you stayed maniacally focused on being in contact with the customer, being at the forefront of what your customer's needs, remembering who your customer is, being out there on the front lines, asking questions, seeking to understand. That's where you're learning these insights of, oh my goodness, they're looking, they see our company as a clock company. They're not getting as much value as they need. We can be doing this. And then that's how you're exploding sales. So this is, I mean, as you said, you've said it multiple times. I mean, it's like, oh, this is kind of like a bumper sticker. This is a little bit cliche, but I think people can forget, right? Leaders in all stages of their career can forget. We get so busy in the operations of our business. Be like, hey, the customer is the boss. Be in contact with your customer on a daily basis, right? So what else are you learning in this season of your life? You're now taking all of these learnings and you're in this second phase. Yeah.
So that was, and I learned a lot of other things as well, right? I mean, I talked about, operating at scale, and I learned, there's, it's funny how all these conversations, it always comes back to relationship. Again, bumper sticker, but it really does, right? And so in a complex, somewhat political environments like SAP and IBM, it's building these alliances and these relationships with broadly within the organization, your leadership, your peers, your organization, right? So it's this continual, the desire to understand and to build these relationships. I also learned some other, I'd say at MBA level skills. I was one of the very early execs that was brought in, NDA'd, when it was decided by the board that IBM was going to divest that entire business unit, which of course, first blush, I'm a mission oriented guy. I was like, wait a minute, we've just doubled the productivity of this organization. We've transitioned from on-premise to SaaS. We've brought together 3 different business units, and we really had shown profound growth, right? But it was decided because IBM shifted its strategy at that time, right? I use the analogy of what IBM decided to do, which was they decided to focus on making the highways, the off-ramps, on-ramps, and gas stations, and not the cars. So they divested that business unit to HCL and to Acoustic. And it made a lot of sense if I, as I step back and I realize from a strategy perspective, and I think long term it's going to pay off for IBM to focus there, right, instead of enterprise software, which surprises a lot of people. What? Right. They're not in enterprise software? They still do some, quite well. They still do. They Sterling Commerce, one of the, I'd say the granddaddy of order management platforms. They still have some analytics and security, but really they're focusing on the infrastructure and the data. And so through that process and through that time at IBM, I was able to really understand how divestitures work. I'd have been involved in some acquisition work, but the divestiture piece really taught me quite a bit.
What else did you learn during that time? I recently read the Jeffrey Immelt book, the CEO of GE, and there was a time during his tenure when they were divesting some major divisions of the company. And it sounds like a similar situation where a number of people had, knew this, top secret information, and they really were struggling with, they were letting go of friends and family, people who had been with the company for, 20 plus years. And it was this gut wrenching time. And I think there was one leader in the book that they're quoting that this guy had to come in and he said it was the toughest time in his career. I think he almost passed out on stage when he was telling people what was going on. And this was after, similar to you, they had had some incredible records and they were doing great. So here you are, you're going through a similar situation. How did you handle that? What did you learn? What are your memories of that moment in time?
These times in our life, they're complex, right? There's the exciting part of it, and the growth, and I love change. I love leading through change. But it was also really hard because I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't even at one point. I couldn't even tell my direct reports. These were VPs, global VPs, and of course I had an NDA. I couldn't talk. So here I am. That year I traveled to 22 countries, running something called the Illumination Forums, and that's maybe another part of the conversation of what was an Illumination Forum. It was a demand generation program. And I was out calling on our clients around the world, and I was also meeting with the teams. And so here I am yelling the battle cry and driving us towards growth and quarterly numbers and painting blue sky, knowing that we were moving towards divestiture. And I struggled with it because I'm an honest guy.
All right.
I feel like generally you get the best results when you bring people along the journey. They understand where you're going, why you're going, and how you're going to get there.
Right.
And because of the situation, I couldn't do that. So I don't know I don't know how I would have done it any different. I can tell you that once we were able to announce, broadly what we were doing, I think I slept a lot better. And we also did a great job of taking care of everybody in the process, including our customers that we're going to be transitioning to HCL, and our employees. And a lot of our employees, I was pleased to see that really basically everybody landed someplace, and it was career additive for people, right? And that was really important to me as we were going through this, that people were taken care of, because we had some amazing talent in there, and that was an important part of the divestiture. The organizational and the financial side of it was important to me, but the people, in the end, is where I spent a lot of my mind share to ensure that we were doing that part right.
For folks who are listening, and one of the things I've found in my career is that it may not be this exact same situation, but there will be times in your career when you're in a leadership position that you're going to be facing a challenge, an obstacle, something that it almost feels like you're in a catch-22. Like, man, and it's high stress, high stakes, and you're asking yourself, okay, how am I going to execute, this particular challenge or problem? And advice that I've been given. There's never a perfect playbook for those things. You're kind of making decisions on the fly and hoping you're making the best decision. When I've asked leaders who are older and wiser than me for advice when I've been facing those types of issues. They've always said, "Hey, Bob, just operate with a high level of character and integrity. Be honest. Make sure you're taking care of your people. Be doing the right thing. And even though you may not be able to be fully, like in your case, you're under an NDA, you couldn't be fully transparent at the time. When you're at the end of it and everything is open, people will be able to look and say, you know what, Bob or Jim or Sally, Rima made the best decisions they possibly could, given this situation, and but they operated with character and integrity at every single point along the way." Is there anything that you would add to that?
I talked earlier about posture, posture of your heart, right? And curiosity and seeking to understand before you form those opinions and before you start talking, right? So you have to listen first. But I would encourage people, once you understand what that mission is, to embrace the situation wholly.
Okay.
Right? To force yourself to be adaptable and flexible in situations, right? Reject rigidity. Now, don't get me wrong.
Right.
People hear me talk a lot about rigor in the sales process and everything. But in the way that we look at our business, especially through these challenging times, to force yourself to be adaptable and flexible, and to choose to keep a positive mindset. Bob, you see your cup of coffee. Can you read what's on the cup?
Let's see here and pull up this great cup. Oh, it's a quote by Abraham Lincoln. "Folks are usually about as happy as they make their minds up to be." And I noticed that that's also on your personal website. That's a quote in your personal website.
It was a quote my father often used. Matter of fact, he told my sisters that he went to school with Abe Lincoln, and they believed it, and they went to school and told their teachers that their dad went to school with Abe Lincoln. Anyways, matter of fact, that cup is a gift. A really good friend of mine and personal coach, Jeff Teppel. He sent that to me because he's probably heard me say it so many times. Yeah. And it comes down to the fact that we have a choice of how we want to look at things personally. When we wake up and through the day, what we want our outlook to be. Now, you have to be careful with that. Bad things happen in this world. Yeah. Cancer happens. People get you have to be careful that it doesn't become a cliche. But I truly do believe that keeping that positive mindset, it is an active decision on our part to do that. Now, that does not mean that you look away from and don't acknowledge challenges and acknowledge data and acknowledge that stuff. But it's like, what do you do once you understand these facts? How do you look at it in terms of how you're going to solve the problem, right? And frankly, seeking out the input from others in the process. But you can't do these things on your own, right? I think a lot of times, and speaking to maybe people that are just starting their career, be careful about looking to leaders that they've got it all figured out. Don't look at me like that. Don't look at Jeff Immelt. Don't look at, because they are the sum of, yes, their experience, but also the people that surround them, right?
For sure. What's interesting, a second ago that you said, the word that you used was embrace. And you said embrace the moment, embrace the challenge. And it was very unique that you used that particular word, because I think a lot of times when a person is facing a challenge or a difficulty, the thing is, like, I want to make as many decisions as I possibly can to get through this as quickly as possible, right? And you didn't say get through it as quickly as possible. You said embrace. And I was like, I love that analogy of embrace it, own it, I'm in it. We got to figure out what we're going to do. We got to and we'll make the wise decisions to get to the other side. But you said embrace it, and I love that. I'm going to ponder on that a little bit further. But so, I mean, you can see it even today. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, we're living through we've lived through some very challenging times. The last number of years have been challenging, whether it's professionally, personally. We've seen it, from politics. We've seen the economy. What are you learning during this season of life, and how is this impacting you as a businessman and as a leader? Any advice or things that you'd share with
it has
people?
been crazy, right? If you think about it, but it's not unprecedented. If you think about the world over the last 100 years, the changes that have taken place. Look, just over the last 20 years, we've seen immense change pre-pandemic, right? Technology and the internet. Think about the implications of the internet in our lives, right? Globalization, right? And how we've become so much more interconnected than before, which has created massive opportunities for growth and innovation, but it's also a lot of challenges. Data and AI. Think about where we are. And that hasn't just started. AI is on the tip of everybody's tongue right now. Well, AI was a big reason I went to IBM in 2016, was they were kind of on the forefront of that. So data and AI. They even started, we believe we live in this remote and flexible work environment. Well, that started a long time ago. But as we came into, let's call it since 2020, I guess the question was, what things I learned and how did I lead through this environment?
Yeah.
It comes back to, again, adaptability and resilience, right? And it was something that, I think my upbringing, it created me to be somebody to not shy away from challenges, but to have curiosity to figure out how you're going to solve them. But, the rapid changes in the conditions of demand and the quick shifts in strategies and work routines and methods of communication. So we were evolving so quickly over that period of time. But I'd say, if the question really is around how do you lead through something like the pandemic, I'd say one of the most important things is, and I think we can all relate to this, is communication and empathy. And the value and the power of having consistent communications with your organization and your clients, because leaders, you have to keep your teams updated on company decisions, on future plans. And then from an empathy perspective, to have the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, and it's really important than ever that, we understand how, people are dealing with personal challenges such as, health issues and caregiver responsibilities and things like that. So it was fairly unprecedented time if you think about it. When all of a sudden now we're having all of our meetings over Zoom. Right. We're not able to get into a boardroom. Right. Now, luckily, that's in the past. Who knows what the future is going to be? But I will tell you that we're better for it because now I believe when we travel, it's more relevant. It's more vital. We used to get on planes for everything. I remember back in the day, I would fly to California for lunch and dinner and make a turnaround trip back to the East Coast. Right. And I also think through that period of time, again, cliche bumper sticker, innovation and creativity, I think skyrocketed because we had to find new ways to get things done. We had to find new ways to sell. We had to find new ways to solve customer problems. We had to find new ways to build team cohesion. But so I actually think it was a pretty rich period of time within American business enterprise.
It has changed the face of the global economy in many ways. And like you've just alluded to, I think in many respects for the better. I don't think that we'll ever go back to what was perceived as normal pre-pandemic. I mean, there's so much, I'm doing so much more business now over Zoom and video conferencing. We used it a little bit, just but not nearly like we do now. Remote work, I think, is here to stay. I mean, you were telling me we were walking around your beautiful property here. We're sitting out in your back deck and looking at your incredible pool and the whole complex that you've built here. And you're like, hey, I love doing my meetings out here. This is my office, but you're still a global traveler and traveling all over the place. So, I'm enjoying the exact same thing in my life and my business. One of the other things that I wanted to maybe ask you about, you had highlighted earlier in our conversation about timing. Timing is everything, and how you started your career, the timing was right. You're pivoting into when you go to IBM and SAP, the timing was perfect, and you're catching these appropriate, and call it trade winds that were favorable. Then you talk a little bit. I mean, you when you're talking about a customer and helping your employees or your sales team understand what is maybe a lead that's not put down that bone. That this is a lead that's not going to be able to. We're going to be able to close. I would all kind of classify maybe that bad timing, maybe a little bit right there. But timing is such a key element in success in a person's life, in a person's career and business. You've been blessed getting in at the right time in various businesses. Were you ever in your career finding yourself in a spot with a company where the timing was bad, where you had a product or service that was, we'll say, past its sell date, or where the economy is moving in a different direction, and this was maybe something that was no longer as viable, right? And how did you discover those? How did you pivot out of those types of things? Because I find, like right now, there's a lot of people, the world is changing so rapidly. And I think that, people are waking up and finding themselves in particular spots in the economy like, oh my goodness, the window of opportunity here is closing rapidly, but they're either leadership is not willing to make a change, or they're afraid to pivot. And I'm watching this all around me of people not being able to jump to the next new thing. They're too scared.
That is a complex question and a more complex answer, but I'll try to boil it down. I have definitely found myself in some situations where it felt that way, and that's where way that things were headed. And I've had the pleasure of being part of watching a pivot, a transformative pivot, and I'll talk about a couple of those. I'd say IBM is a good example of where the board had the wherewithal to understand that portfolio of product is $1.6 billion worth of annual revenue running through it. They realized that it didn't fit their strategy because the market was making a dramatic shift at this time. The competition in the market against Salesforce and Adobe and SAP and all these other commerce startups, there was a good bit of technical debt in that product, and they knew that it didn't align with the strategic goals of IBM.
And where they were going in the future.
Where they're going, right? They're going to build on-ramps and off-ramps and highways and gas stations, and they had the wherewithal. And so when they decided that they were going to divest, it broke my heart because we were succeeding, right? But it didn't fit because there were such dramatic changes happening in technology. Again, moving towards multi-tenant SaaS, right? So many other shifts that were occurring at that time. Distributed services, microservices architecture, containerization, and orchestration, and all these things, right?
Right.
So I had the benefit of watching a hard business decision being made that supported an overall strategy. Another great example of it was, and this is a good segue into my third chapter.
Okay.
Which is, I think about it as, if I'm going to put chapters to these things, which sounds pretty egotistical to do, to put chapters in my career, but I'll do it anyways. And that is scaling the startup, right?
Okay.
So after we divested IBM, I had the opportunity to stay at IBM as an executive. And it's a great company. But my entrepreneurial DNA was calling at that time, right? And I started looking. I wanted to get in the startups. I wanted to scale businesses, right? I wanted to work with PE firms. I wanted to create something and to grow it. And so I had the opportunity when I left IBM to join a German software company called CoreMedia, and they were a content management provider. They've been around for many years, and I was chief global revenue officer of that company. And this was a company that had incredible product. It was like Caterpillar earth moving equipment compared to a garden tractor. Like it was used by some of the very large corporations to manage their e-commerce content.
Okay.
All the images, everything that is on companies' websites, it's managed through that. This product was an on-premise solution because that's what was required to to have enough horsepower behind it. And there was a time, I was concerned that we weren't going to be able to make that pivot fast enough to offer microservices and to offer SaaS solutions, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where the story of PE comes in. And I was part of helping bring OpenGate Capital to the market to bring the right funding to drive growth within this company. The company had been around for over 20 years. And OpenGate allowed us and gave us the ability to invest in the product. And again, make that pivot to be able to be responding to the change of technologies and where the market was going.
So, wow, you've made this big pivot in your career. You're going from working at major global businesses like IBM and SAP. Now you're like, I want to take my learnings and I want to go and help startups scale. I want to get that. And it's interesting as I'm listening to you talk about this. I can see that you're a voracious learner. You're wanting to do something new. It's like you've scaled certain mountains. You've gotten to the top and be like, hey, this was fun, but I want a new challenge. And I tell you what, there's almost in the business world, there's no challenge as fun as taking a small startup company and scaling it. Because you're wearing so many different hats. Yeah. So you've gone from, starting your own business, being an entrepreneur, taking those learnings into huge, iconic global companies, and then now in a different stage of your career saying, all right, I want to go and help other startups. I want to scale them. So while you're learning a ton in this season of life, is there anything different now when you're going and you're helping these startup companies scale? Do you view the business world differently? Do you view the landscape differently? Do you view entrepreneurship differently now than you did at the very beginning of your career when your dad was giving you this advice and he was encouraging you, hey, son, go out there and start your company. This is where you ought to get started. Yeah. What's different? You're in a different stage of life. You've learned so much. How do you juxtapose those two positions? Because you're now back in startup land, but you've got so much more experience.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. This drawing me back, into, closer to my DNA, my entrepreneurial DNA, and what drew me out of, when I had the opportunity, when when IBM divested, I could have stayed, but I was drawn into, as you really well kind of described, the feeling behind that. I feel like there are so many amazing things that the big enterprises do programmatically, right? Their use of data, how they can operate and orchestrate and execute. And so my goal was really to do big enterprise things, but with more of a guerrilla approach, more with less. The simplification and and repeatable processes that are really the hallmark of large enterprises. So how do you bring that into a much smaller, nimble, more guerrilla approach, and make it scale to the needs of a startup? Because otherwise you can just absolutely choke a small organization with too much process.
Right.
So you want to drive simplification, but you want to call on and leverage these practices that a lot of leading enterprises have developed over the years.
Yeah, I've seen that where someone who has worked with a big company and they try to bring these big company practices to a small startup, and it absolutely fails. I remember I had some of my biggest hiring mistakes when I was leading a different startup company was going out and getting some iconic leaders from. I had one that was funny enough, it was an individual who was working, had a senior leadership position at IBM. And I had another one who had a mid-level leadership position at Coca-Cola. And both of those individuals could not make the transition from working in big corporate America to small startup. And it was funny because they had incredible academic backgrounds. Both of them had MBAs, both of iconic American institutions, academic institutions, this wonderful resume, and literally just both of them complete and total failures in the startup realm. And they're great people, but they couldn't make that transition.
I know that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and I'd struggle if I hadn't had that first chapter of being an entrepreneur and creating something and failing at points along the way and learning from that, right? And then layering on top of that enterprise approach and learning from some of the most amazing people, being not, surrounded by peers, people that work for me and so I think those two components were really important for me because I have a sense that if I would have only operated in large enterprise, I probably would have fallen into that trap of, deploying all these amazing strategies and tactics and programs and frankly, choking the growth of a company. You have to create an environment where, first of all, you hear the phrase fail fast forward, right?
Yeah.
Which is go do it, learn from it, readjust, right? Make a plan, execute it, learn, adjust, do it again.
Yep. Wow. So much great advice here. We've been going here for a little bit, and I appreciate all the time that you've invested in the podcast so far. Let me ask you a couple rapid fire questions. So now that this stage of life, any advice that you would give young people when they are facing challenges or adversity or maybe setbacks in their career early on? I've noticed. I have a few examples right now of some young people who are, for the very first time in their life facing some adversity, and they're like, okay, what do I do? What advice would you give? Like, what advice you give to your kids?
Yeah, I'd say when you're coming into either a new chapter in your career or a new job, is kind of what I think the question is centers on. Take the time to learn the culture that you're entering, right? And if you're in a position that you're supposed to be affecting and influencing that culture, you better understand it before you do anything. Whenever I'm entering into a new space or a new organization, I go on quote unquote listening tours, which
That's so smart.
is, you probably question if I can do that because the amount of words coming out of my mouth this morning, but to shut up and listen. And also to understand that, and this isn't a condemnation to any organization, but there's always hidden dysfunction. Every organization, every relationship, there's a hidden dysfunction. Some of them are less hidden than others, right? And frankly, this is taking the time, build the relationships. I go back to my, what I learned through at Kronons UKG, that 360, that feedback that I had gotten, which is all about Jim, which broke my heart because in my mind it wasn't. It was about executing and delivering on what our mission was, but taking the time to build the relationships because people aren't going to follow you or partner with you if they don't have that relationship. And also understand, again, it takes time. You have to listen. Sometimes the mission is a little different than what was originally communicated, right? So these are very soft skills. Like how do you put, a concrete action behind that, other than the only thing I can say is listen, be curious before you start to form opinions too quickly. And that's a challenge that I have, frankly. I think I'm super smart and I can read a person in a situation, in a room, and a strategy really quickly. I have to force myself to take time. But, in addition to, that being curious and taking time to understand the people, we have to understand the product. We have to understand that value proposition behind the product. We have to understand the market and the competition. And frankly, at the end of the day, we all work for our investors. We work for a board. So we have to understand the broader strategy and the expectations. And all while you're doing that is, building your support network. And then here is probably one of the things that it took me too long in my career to understand was to ask for feedback. To ask for feedback.
Okay.
Don't assume anything, and ask for that feedback. Feedback from everybody, from your spouse to your customers, to your management, to your employees. And I think by doing that, you're going to learn so much more than just come into your own assumptions. Yeah,
that's so good. What books are you reading right now? What's some of the things that you're trying to discover, and what are things that you're enjoying at the moment? In this summer's been wonderful. As I'm having an opportunity to really spend time with people in the industry, analysts,
people I've worked with in the past and spending a lot of time. And so I'm picking up on what people are reading. And, recently, a couple that have been interesting for me. One is a book called The Alliance.
Is that the LinkedIn guy wrote that? Or
yeah, Reid Hoffman.
Yeah,
Reid Hoffman, right? And the whole concept, you want me to just give a soundbite of what it is?
Soundbite.
Yeah, it's really about the relationship between employee and employer has changed dramatically. When I started my career, people would join IBM and they'd stay there their entire career.
Yeah,
it's different today. Things have become much more transactional.
Right? We have little micro careers now, right?
Yeah. And it fundamentally changes the relationship between the employer and employee, and you have to realize that. And frankly, by doing that, you can help each other. So there has to be almost like an accord between the employee and the employer. There's three different types of employees that exist. There's rotational tour of duty, and they're more generalized and usually applied to roles that are not as highly specialized. There's transformational tours of duty. These are people that are in the company for a very specific mission and an outcome of the employee's role. They're very clearly defined. Okay. And then there's the foundational, right? And these are the employees that are deeply tied to the identity of the organization, right? And and not to go into too much detail on it, but I found it really some profound insights around this, which is to have an understanding with an employee, which is this is in the tour of duty. And again, you have military, you served in the background and in your background, and the idea of a tour of duty is a very defined mission, and that mission isn't forever. That mission has a beginning and it has an end, and defining what that is and what success looks like is so important. And it comes down to this contract that occurs between the employee and employer, which is you're going to do this as an employee. And the company, in exchange for that, besides paying you and having this honest relationship, is going to help you in your career. And that may even include leaving the company at some point, going on to the next point of their career. It may include coming back at some point. So I just found it as incredibly interesting. It changed my perception of what today employment looks like. Employment and careers, everything's changing, isn't it? Right. Another one that I really encourage people to read is a book from Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. It's one of the best books on negotiating ever. This guy was a crisis hostage negotiator, and he applies a lot of his learnings in that. He really challenges some conventional negotiation wisdoms, frankly, advising against the aim to reach a compromise. Everybody thinks it's just a compromise. Instead, he suggests that successful negotiation doesn't split the difference, but it rather uses skilled empathy and deep listening to achieve better outcomes. So just that's awesome. Solid book. And then again, the other one that I mentioned is the book from Andrew Murray on humility. And this is, if you're religious or not, if you're a Christian or not, doesn't matter. The premise behind it holds true no matter what, which is pride is the biggest hindrance to growth. And that may be one of the most important quotes that you've had all morning. You mentioned it early. You're mentioning it now towards the end of our time. And I have seen, you and I both probably have many examples of folks that we know who are extremely talented, but where, as the old adage, and the scripture reference, pride cometh before the fall, or goeth before the fall. And it's so important for us to remain humble. Well, and it's, Bob, it's a daily thing, and pride breeds so many things, including insecurity of not looking unpack as great as you, right? And so, I think part of maturing as a human and as a professional is your early warning signals to yourself earlier, where you catch yourself, where you get that little feeling, and you wouldn't maybe even describe it as pride, but it's a feeling you have. And it's this feeling of being found out. We hear a lot about the imposter. The imposter syndrome, right? The sooner we can get over that, the better we're going to be, the happier we're going to be. People are going to want to work with you more, but it's a daily thing. It's not just like, I'm going to have humility. I'm going to reject pride because I think we have a tendency to gravitate back to that when we have feelings of insecurity. It's a defense mechanism. I hadn't
heard of somebody connecting pride and insecurity. Right. That's interesting that you're connecting that. Is that part of the book there with
Yeah.
Andrew Murray and
I mean, it's really throughout it. And you said it, pride comes before the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, it's in there. It's really an interesting topic because as soon as you start talking about humility and you start comparing yourself against what humility looks like, it's hard to be humble when you start to comparing yourself to it, right? And again, I think I mentioned it earlier. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking about yourself less. You know what I mean? So I think it's a lifelong journey for all of us. And the sooner we can get our arms around that and embrace that, I think you're going to find some riches.
Well, we live in a culture right now. We've been talking about technology, how your career has spanned all of these technological advancements, all the various things that you've done. You started and ended on humility, and but one of the things that you've seen manifest during your career is the rise of social media. And social media, I was just having a conversation with another leader within the last week, and how social media has created this 24/7 environment of comparison, and that comparison is the thief of many times happiness, right? Because no matter what you have going on in your life, no matter how good it is, there's always going to be somebody on social media who is living something different, has something different. And we watch kids today, right, who are spending too much time on social media, and they're in this comparison world of comparing everything. I want to double click on this concept of someone who might be struggling with pride, or that when we need to fight pride in our life, and how that can also be connected to insecurity. I find that concept just really interesting, because a lot of times you would think that a person who is prideful doesn't have insecurity. They're the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? They're overly confident. They're overly enamored with what they've achieved, their life, their stature, and so forth. But I want to unpack this with you just a little bit in terms of just like how that it's actually maybe is it a coping mechanism
we're
to compensating for these deep insecurities that we have in our life, and so we're trying to put this prideful exterior focus out on it.
And anybody who says that they don't have insecurities, they know they're lying to themselves. We all do, and the sooner we can accept that, the sooner you start getting to work on that. I am quite uncomfortable, as much as we've talked about humility. I'm kind of uncomfortable talking about it, because there are times that I am prideful. Now, the good news is, as I've matured or gotten older, again, my early defense warning kicks in a little bit earlier, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And figuring out how to check that at the door is earlier and often is, I think, where you really can, move yourself into a position of leadership. And I think, back to your question, about any advice for people that are just, early stage of their career is to understand that, right? Nobody is expecting you to be perfect, to have every answer, right? What we want as business leaders are people that are curious, hardworking, they're resilient, right? They learn from their mistakes. Of course, they work hard, but they're curious, right? And they haven't drank their own Kool-Aid. And I think it's been a great thread through this conversation, frankly, but I do shudder to talk about it, because I don't want anybody to think that I have figured it out on this thing about, being humble and rejecting pride. I raise it more as one of my Achilles heel is that. And the good thing is I've had people in my life that have surrounded me, everything from my family to people I work with, that have cared about me enough to call me out on it.
Well, we're touching on a topic here of insecurity and how it's connected to humility, and also in a roundabout way connected to pride. And one of the things is, as you're sitting here sharing this, I'm thinking back to, because you said everybody, every leader, everyone we know has insecurities on something. A few moments ago, we were talking about the imposter syndrome, right? And I think one of the things that I've learned in my career is, I've been fortunate enough to be in YPO now for, oh goodness, since 2009. And I get together with a group of senior CEOs and presidents on a monthly basis, and we talk. And in this, authentic and transparent environment where people, talk about their insecurities. And I've watched, every single person in the various forums I've participated in. Everyone has a challenge. Everybody's got an insecurity. Everyone deals with this imposter syndrome from time to time in their career. But as adults, we're in a secure and private environment where we're able to talk about this, put these issues on the table and look at it. You go all the way back to think about junior high. People hate the times of junior high where, how insecure we were as kids kind of coming up, but we hid it, right? It was like you never wanted to talk about your insecurities. It was almost something that maybe you were ashamed about, but you dealt with those issues by yourself generally in private, and you didn't really have someone to kind of talk with and have maybe therapy with. As you get older, you realize, oh, it's not just me being insecure about X, Y, and Z, but everybody is dealing with some type of, insecurity or challenge. And so I think my advice to young people or people who would be listening is that, those types of insecurities, it's something that everybody deals with. And when you're able to sit down and be in an environment with other leaders, friends, trusted advisors, mentors, you can put those on the table. You can talk about it. So, Jim, one of the things that you've been sharing today, you've been, transparent. You're being authentic, and you're openly saying, "Hey, these are things that I work on. I want to be self-aware." And that time, that the humility that you had earlier in your career, where you took the advice of your boss, you took that executive coaching, is a transformational point of your career to enable you to be a better leader. And you've taken that self-awareness thing and constantly asking questions. How can I get better? How can I improve? How can I learn? And it's just one of the things that I really admire and respect about you. And you've been a great example in this podcast for other people to be authentic and real with themselves and to have that same level of self-awareness to get better. And that's really the story arc that I see that you're on in your journey of leadership. You've had tremendous success. You've had tremendous opportunities. The story arc, this is beautiful story arc of your career, but it goes in parallel with the story arc of your career of continuing to learn, continuing to grow, trying to have greater self-awareness, trying to ask more and more difficult questions, and just improve. Be spirit-led, be humble. I really appreciate that about you, Jim.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. And I know that I haven't figured it all out either. Matter of fact, as you get on in your career and you get a little bit older and you get some gray hairs, people aren't as forthcoming with the input and guidance and coaching, because they either figure that you've got it all figured out already, or they are not in a position to be able to really be honest with you. And I think that's so important that you continue to surround yourself with people like that. I think there's a couple traits of great leaders. You could do a long list of traits, right? There's the hard skills, like they know how to operate. They know how to communicate a vision. They know how to get the right people together, the right people on the bus going in the same direction. They have these skills, right, that they are imbued with and that they've learned through their career. But to me, the two most important things, humility is one of them. The other is vulnerability, right? If you think about the people that we will follow into battle, they have the humility, but they also have vulnerability, meaning, and you can almost, somebody might say, well, those are just interchangeable words, right? They certainly go together. But the vulnerability is for a leader to be able to say they're sorry, to admit when they're wrong, to embrace the fact, the imposter syndrome. Matter of fact, we escape the imposter syndrome as soon as we admit that we don't know every single thing about everything. Right. So that vulnerability piece, I will follow somebody into battle when those two traits are in place. Yes, they need to have core competencies in running a business. They need to say the right things. They need to be great communicators. But at the end of the day, those two components of humility and vulnerability, I think, are most central to the success. And, I'd like to think I'm, maybe in a few years we meet back up and we talk about, and there's this next chapter, right?
Yeah.
I think that next chapter for me, it continues down this road of scaling and growth.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that someday I may not end up back at an SAP, right? Because there's still opportunities to bring the startup entrepreneurial spirit into large enterprise, right? But I think certainly we are on the forefront of some amazing things, right? You look at over the last 20 years, we had the internet impacted everything. There's a massive growth of enterprise software around marketing and customer engagement and the way that we engage. We were talking about direct to consumer. We engage the market. So all that's changed. We all know AI, machine learning is literally going to impact every aspect of our life. I'm quite encouraged about what's going to happen, frankly, longer term economically. I'm not concerned that everybody's going to lose their job because you're going to have a chat GTP going to be doing your job.
Right.
These are new tools.
Right.
And so I think
just like Word, just like PowerPoint.
It is.
Right. It may have displaced some things, but it was a tool that enables everybody to be more productive.
And now everybody can become upscaled.
Yes.
We become more strategic. So I'm pretty certain, and I can tell you a lot of the conversations I'm having about what my next mission is going to be very much grounded in generative AI. So it's very exciting days to come. I'd say for everybody.
Yeah.
We're gonna always have some bumps in the road.
Right.
But we're about to see some amazing things happen technologically that are going to impact our lives and economy.
That's awesome. Well, I share your spirit of optimism and human ingenuity and adaptation and continued growth. And I tell you, one of the things that I've really enjoyed is just watching you be vulnerable and transparent. And you said, a few moments ago, just the importance of vulnerability in your life. And I think there may be some that look at vulnerability as weakness, but actually what you've articulated is that vulnerability is strength. And that when you are vulnerable, that's when you're strongest. That's when you are where people will trust you. They'll follow you into battle because they know that you're being real and authentic with them. And that's the type of leader that you've been. I think that's one of the reasons why that you've had such incredible success. And I can't wait to get back together with you and see what the next chapter is and the great things that you're doing. And we're going to have you back on the podcast, and so we can dive a little bit deeper into more technical stuff on the new technologies and how it's going to be impacting every American family and everybody who's operating, from young people starting out their careers to older folks who are pivoting and adapting into the new things.
I'll leave a thought, an encouragement, and frankly, not just to people in the early part of their careers, but regardless of where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Where I have grown the most is in people that know me. They know what I'm about to say, which is I grow the most, and I'm my best me when I'm slightly over my skis.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm in a place that I'm being stretched. And I just encourage us to do that, because failure is an option. We are going to fail, right? But again, it sounds like another bumper sticker, but it truly is that place where I can just say I wouldn't have learned and had the opportunities that I've had if I haven't embraced that change. And some challenges, like when I got some of these jobs were fairly big jobs.
Mm-hmm.
People were like, "Holy crap!" Like, wow, that taking on the job at IBM. And it stretched me, but I grew in immeasurable ways.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, we've all got to be ready to accept failure in various things. If one of the quotes that I've heard from multiple Silicon Valley venture capitalists is, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, right?
Yep.
You're not pushing the envelope. You're playing it too safe. And today is not a time to be playing it safe. Today is a time for all of us, no matter where we're at in our career, no matter what we're trying to do. The worst thing we can do is play it safe. The best place for us to be, as you've articulated, is to be out a little bit over our skis. Know that, hey, we're pushing the envelope. We're gonna have some successes. We're gonna have some failures, but those failures is ultimately where we learn and we grow. And Jim, you have done that very, very well in your career. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. It's been extremely beneficial for me. I've really enjoyed this, and I can't wait to be able to share it with some friends.
Bob, thank you very much. You're very, very kind. I just honored to spend a little bit of time with you this morning, and I'm excited about the journey you're on. I hope you talk about yourself more with your audience, because I think the learnings that you could share through what you've learned through your service and through the leadership that you've had. So maybe one day we'll turn the mics and I'll interview you.
That would be awesome. I'd love to do that. I've had a couple of people ask, and I've always put it. I like being on this side. I like being the guy asking the questions, so in the background. But we've had incredible guests on the program, and you are another one of a long list of distinguished individuals that I've just had the honor and the privilege of interviewing. So thank you so much for your time.
You are very kind. Thank you, Bob.
Today's episode was engineered by Mitch White with graphic and marketing by Tristan Dickie. Special thanks to Jim for taking time to share with us and our listeners his story and learnings from his journey. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or wherever you go to listen to your favorite pods. If you like the show, please share with a friend and give us a review. That's always appreciated. Thank you for spending time with us today, and we look forward to spending more time with you